From the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Today is Tuesday, September 20, 2011. My name is Joe Monnier of the Southern Oral History Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm with videographer John Bishop in Washington, D.C. at the Jefferson Building of the Library of Congress to record an oral history review for the Civil Rights History Project, which is a joint undertaking of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Library of Congress. And we are really honored and privileged today to have with us Miss Doris Ann Ladner.
Dorie
Ladner, and Dr. Joyce Ladner, sisters originally from Mississippi who have had
Joyce Ann as well.
Joyce Ann as well. Long histories of involvement in progressive struggle in the movement. And let me note as well, we're delighted to have with us Elaine Nichols, who is the project curator at the museum. And I think we are not, one quick housekeeping note, I think we are not reporting to the XD card. Okay. Ms. Ladner, Dr. Ladner, thank you so much for coming in and sitting down. It's a real privilege and honor to be with you.
Thank you.
You set me the challenge of opening with a complicated or stimulating question, and I thought I might, we can work back from this, but let me take you back, since we're sitting here on the Mall in Washington, D.C., let me take you back to 1963, and I want to ask about the march, but most particularly I want to ask about the ambivalence and the range of thought and feeling and criticism that you had about that experience, because I know it was a complicated question.
Well, my feelings were one of ambivalence and complicated in that there was so many things going on the front line, meaning that Medgar Evers had been killed on June 12th. His funeral was June 16th, and Lawrence Guyot had been beaten. Miss Fannie Lou Hamer had been jailed and beaten very badly in Winona, Mississippi. And there was a bus boycott going, not bus boycott, but a boycott of all the stores in Jackson, Mississippi. And people were being arrested in Greenwood, Mississippi. We were under siege. So we knew that we had to return back to these homes. We had 3 guys on death row in Georgia. So coming together was good to address, bring our grievances to the seat of government, to let the president and everybody know. But we knew that we had to return back to those towns and what would be waiting for us. I really looked forward to coming here and to letting everybody know what was going on. But in reality, James Farmer, who was executive director of CORE, was in jail in Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana. He couldn't attend. So my sister Joyce worked in the March on Washington office, coordinating the transportation, working out the logistics. And I was working in the SNCC office, raising money for the organization's livelihood, and also recruiting people to participate in the same march. But the point was, I was always thinking about what was going on, because I'm a frontline person, and always thinking about the strategy. And my sister was talking about the fun that we had, and I was thinking about the other side of it, and I wanted to say, and death shall have no dominion over what we were doing at the same time, because we didn't fear death as well as enjoying ourselves, partying and so forth. We were young and zealots. We were zealots. So in essence, the one thing that bothered us was that we didn't sing, which always kept us going. And when they wanted to change John's speech. But I'll let Joyce talk about that, because she was involved back there with Cortland and Jim and so forth. But that was one thing that turned us off. And we were always busy. You know, we had all this energy. 19, 20 years old, you're very energetic.
Very busy. I was at a conference, student conference in Lake Forest, Illinois, the day that Medgar Evers was killed. And I had gone there as a SNCC representative to try to recruit students and also to raise money and to generally spread the word about the Southern movement. And I got a call while I was at this conference one evening from Ruby Doris Robinson. And Ruby said, "Joyce, Megha has been killed." And I said, "Oh my God, I've got to go home. We've got to get back to Jackson." And she said, "No, you need to go to Washington to work on the March on Washington." I said, "Yeah, but I've known Megha, since I was 14. I mean, I was very upset. I think I was even crying. I mean, I'm sure I was." And she said, "But we need to send 2 representatives from SNCC to work on the march. And I want you to go from there, get you an airline ticket, and I want you to go to New York City for the rest of the summer to work on the march." And she said, I remember so clearly, "This is what Megha would have expected of you, or wanted you to do, one or the other," she said. And I was like taken aback, but I'd always had the ability to think with my head, even in difficult emotional times. So I saw the logic of what anyone could appeal to my logic, so she appealed to that part of me. And so I was then off to New York to work at the Harlem headquarters for the March on Washington. And I spent the summer there working under Bayard Rustin's direction. Dorie and I stayed with Rochelle Horowitz, who was a young person. She lived at 8th Avenue and 24th Street in the ILGW condo apartments. And she had a 1-bedroom apartment there. Dorie and I slept on the sofa. And then later in the summer, Eleanor Holmes arrived. And she was at Yale Law School, and she came, and she joined us up at the March headquarters. So while Dorie was working out of the SNCC office, Rochelle, Eleanor, and I worked up in the Harlem office at the March. And my job really was to raise money. So I went out on Long Island, went out to Jersey, around the city, spreading the word about the march and why it was so important to bring people who were involved in the movement from the South to participate in the march. So Rochelle used to say that every time Joyce went out to raise money, she came back with enough to rent another bus. So, and that was what was important to us. And we worked long hours. We worked on Saturday. It was very tiring. One Saturday, I remember seeing Malcolm X for the first time. He used to speak on corner 125th Street, and I stopped and listened to him speak. And as I said, we worked very long hours. We did whatever Bayard told us to do. So it was
Well organized.
very well organized. He was a great organizer. He had a very clear tactical sense, and I mean, he saw the big picture, and anything
Do you know of anyone that participated in the march?
he asked us to do, we did, because, but he also left us with enough flexibility, to be independent and go out there and do what had to be done. So every night, we worked late at night, came back to the apartment, and there's Bobby Dylan sitting on the sofa, strumming his guitar, and I wanted to go to sleep. And he would sit there till midnight, and I just couldn't wait until he'd go to sleep. But he was sitting there entertaining Dorie. And he was well known, but we were all young people at the time. I didn't see him as a great, famous person or anything. So we were peers in a way. And then we all flew down to Washington for the march the day before. And we stayed at what was then called the Statler Hilton Hotel. It's now
16th and K.
Right. It's the Washington,
Not the
Washington Hilton, but
the Hilton.
I'm not sure what the official name of that hotel is, but it was back then it was called Statler Hilton, and it was the March Hotel. And I remember There were a lot of media people, a lot of people who were there for the march. And I remember meeting Malcolm X, seeing him rather, in the lobby after the march. And I'm pretty sure I saw him there before the march occurred as well.
No, we saw him the morning after we picketed the Justice Department.
Yeah, early that morning, we went down to picket the Justice Department.
Because we had 3 guys on
Because
death
of
row.
Don Harris,
Ralph
Ralph Perdue and
Ralph
Allen and John Perdue were in jail in Americus, Georgia, and they were jailed for sedition. And essentially what they were doing was trying to organize, and that was the charge they were charged. That was the tremendous charge, I mean, because they could have been killed, right?
And we had petitioned the federal government to no avail.
So we picketed them about 6 o'clock that morning. Then we got ready and earlier went on over to the mall for the march, and I had a pass, stage pass, because I was on the staff. And so what I remember first was seeing all those people. I mean, it was an incredible sight. It was a 19-year-old from Mississippi who had never seen huge numbers. In fact, no one on that platform had seen numbers like that before. But I remember seeing people coming and coming and coming, and they just kept coming. And then I saw the people on stage, and I think I might have been impressed by some of them, but I think probably most by Josephine Baker. She was the person I remembered most, and I mean, because she was a legend, and I could not imagine that I would have ever met her. But she was very gregarious and exotic looking, and she was shaking everyone's hand and hugging people and so on. And then seeing the actors, people in movies up there, and that was, even though there were people who were involved, who were very strong supporters of SNCC, you know, who raised a lot of money for us. And then seeing the union guys on stage, then seeing Mahalia Jackson and hearing her sing. In other words, it cut across a swath of a lot of people, you know, who were a swath of America on that stage. I remember seeing Marlon Brando, and I got the kind of chills when I saw him and Josephine Baker, and I was thinking more than anything else that our support really ran deep, you know. That was what I felt. And I saw Lena Horne, and I met her earlier in the summer because
she came to Jackson, Mississippi at the request of Medgar Evers before he was killed.
I met her at the Delta Sigma Theta convention that summer in New York when Joan Trumpauer, who was later my roommate at Tougaloo, and Joyce Barrett, who worked with SNCC in Southwest Georgia, and we were all Deltas. There were 2 white girls who were members of Delta Sigma Theta, and we were all in the movement. So Jean Noble, who was the Delta Sigma Theta president at the time, and was from Albany, Georgia, and a professor at the time at Brooklyn College, later at NYU, invited us to speak about what was happening in the South. And the Deltas were very activist-oriented, and they used to bail other Deltas, young Delta sorors, out of jail in the South. And so we spoke at the convention about what was happening. Lena Horne talked about having been down in Jackson, and she had a very, very strong, deep emotional tie to the movement. Very unusual. She felt it in her solar plexus.
Her mother had, according to her biography, her mother had taken her to Georgia, her natural mother, because she was reared by her grandmother. Her father's mother had taken her to Georgia, and she stayed for a long period of time, and she so identified with that area because, you know, she never lost her southern accent. And Billy Strayhorn was also with her, and her son. So, and I remember being at a house there in Jackson with Dr. Noble, president of Delta, Lena Horne, Dick Gregory, and I'm not sure who else, Medgar Evers was there. and they were all talking, and here I'm like 19 or 20 years old, sitting there observing them. And the one thing that about Lena Horne was that when Joyce and I were on the platform at the Lincoln Memorial, the French television wanted to interview her. She said, "No, these are the young people you should interview."
She wouldn't
She
allow
said,
herself to be interviewed at all.
Interview them.
And she took me by the hand and took me over to the, I think it was NBC, that Nancy Dickerson, the legendary female reporter, television news person, was up on a scaffold, and we climbed up the scaffold, and she told her, interview this young woman, because she lives in the South and she knows what it's like. So she was very generous in that regard. And I remember being interviewed, and when I got back home a week later to Miss Hattiesburg, my mother said, "I saw you on TV." And that was like, so, this is 1963, you remember 50 years, almost 50 years ago. And television wasn't what it is now. So it was so strange. And Mother said, yeah, all the neighbors, she said, Miss Katie saw you, and Miss Ida saw you. She went on all the neighbors who had seen me as well. And my younger sisters and brothers had as well. And that made, our mother was low-key, no nonsense,
strong-willed,
very strong-willed, and kind of shy. But she,
like me.
Right, just the opposite of and she didn't give you a lot of compliments, but when she gave you one, she said, "Well, you look nice up there." And I said, "Oh, thank you, Mother." And that meant everything, because and she had a lot of ambivalence about our involvement in the movement, because she was afraid that, number one, something could happen to us, and also she always worried that the house would be burned down by the Klan.
But Mother started off teaching us, let me go back to how it all started. When we were very young, I remember her telling us to always look a white man in the eyes when you're talking to
them.
them.
And don't blink.
Never look down. And we were like 4 and 5 years old. And she grew up in an integrated community in Wayne County, Mississippi. And so
it was really
her,
shaped the way she saw people, and she never feared anyone. So and she always told us
that we were as good as anybody.
Yeah, that was the mantra that passed through 5 generations of our family, maternal line of our family. We can go back in a minute and talk about that. But Mother always, while she had ambivalence and some fear and trepidation about our involvement, what I always remember is that she never told us not to go, and that was important. She never said, stay here, never. And so when I remember on that day, we, being interviewed by a French media reporter, and then Nancy Dickerson at NBC. And so it was, but what I remembered most was John Lewis's speech, because I was on the podium with Cortland, Mildred, and Jim Foreman, and John. There were others around, but that small core group of people was when John was saying, well, I don't want to change anything. I don't want to. And, he wasn't screaming or shouting, because he's soft-spoken. And Jim was saying, well, they shouldn't be telling, who is this archbishop to be telling us what to do? And of course, as word spread out in the crowd to the SNCC people, everybody got very upset, because this was our speech, and what we felt most of all was that this archbishop doesn't know what we go through. Who is he? What right and authority? And we always challenged authority. Who gave him the right to decide what John should say? And there was a crisis on the platform for a while. And finally, the language was changed as little as possible, and he gave the speech. But that and the guy, our friends being in jail in Americus, Georgia, were the defining things I remembered most, that I remember now about the march. Of course, I remember King's speech, but we had an ambivalent relationship with King as well. We referred to him as DeLawd, D-E-L-A-W-D, like the Lord, and everybody's looking up to him, when in fact SNCC people went into the most dangerous areas like Albany and other places, and we called it breaking an area. You know, staying there under the toughest conditions until you finally have a breakthrough with the local community. When they begin to let you stay with them, then you begin to, they come out to the meetings and they start getting involved and organizing as well. And then it builds up to a crisis stage, and that's when King would come in, we felt. And so we had an ambivalent relationship with him. We respected him, of course, but it wasn't all, oh, this is a fantastic man, and this great speech he gave, because that wasn't it. The reality was that we knew we were leaving that next day. I left the next morning with John Lewis on a flight back to Atlanta. Funny what you remember. I remember the plane was in the back of the airline. There was a round seating area, like a circular sofa back there. And John and I were sitting back there. And we went to the SNCC office, and I went back there because I was waiting for a ride back to Hattiesburg, because a week later I was going back to Tougaloo for my senior year. How did you get back?
In a car.
But did you go back to New York first?
No, I went to Jackson.
Well, John, I guess it was because I was given a plane ticket because I had been on the staff to get back south. Otherwise, I would have been in the car as well. And then what I remember is that I don't remember riding a high euphoria either. I'm not sure that of course, time and events reshape memory. But I don't recall having seen that as something that I savored and carried with me, because we couldn't for long, because we were right back in that same tough environment. 3 weeks later, we got on a bus and Bob Moses drove a school bus to Birmingham. And he took a dozen or more SNCC workers
September 18th.
to the funeral of the 3 little girls who had been murdered. So I always saw that as, okay, back in your face, you had your big march, but we're back in control, the white racists. So we didn't have time to savor things, the march or anything else. It was a big event. And also, when, as young people, you don't hold on to things. There's some more living to do right after that. So that was what I remembered most. But I remember the contradiction in my mind. There's all these people there. And then we're now at a funeral of the most vulnerable people of all. And they hadn't killed children before. And that was another big thing that stuck out in my mind. I remember writing
Emmett Till had been murdered.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Emmett Till, that's when I remember first being very upset about a child being killed.
Because we so identified with him.
Yeah, he was our age, and
Yeah.
right, and in the throes of of adolescence, and here's a boy, and the feeling was that if they could do that to him, they could kill my brothers. I never thought that they would kill me, but I
always felt they would kill me.
I felt they would kill my brothers.
Very deeply. Very deeply.
I remember, I don't mean to
No, go ahead.
interrupt your train. Remember, Ms. Ladner, that summer in Natchez, when you were ill so frequently, I understand, because of the pressure and the...
Yes, the stress.
Yeah.
I would go to sleep at night, not expecting to wake up. Yeah, and it was unusual because I've never seen a telephone that would ring in your hand and it's off the hook. And
What do you mean?
literally holding the phone, you take the phone off the hook, the receiver, and it's still ringing, because people in the South go to bed very early,
Right.
and the phone would start ringing probably about between 6:30 and 7, and they would leave their phones off the hook, so we had no contact with the outside world. And we lived right beside an alley, so we never knew whether or not we were going to wake up. And I developed stomach problems from eating It was pure stress, but it made me more determined. So determined one time that I went to Mr. Charles Evers had gotten maybe close to 80 people arrested, and they were taken to Parchment Penitentiary. And I never followed him because I didn't think that he was.
You didn't respect him.
I didn't respect him. And so we were trying to get the bond signed. You needed 2 signatures, the chief of police, and you needed a property owner. And so I got so frustrated because we were, in the Delta, we had to travel from Natchez, which is in the far south, to the Mississippi Delta, which is probably 200 miles to get people out. And I asked one of the police officers, where is the chief of police? And he said, he's at the Holiday Inn. So I got a cab and went to the Holiday Inn, which was segregated, and stood and had him paged. I was at the desk, the cashier's desk, and had him paged, standing in the middle of the floor. I was that frustrated and that angry. And so he never responded. I don't know what I would have done if he had confronted me. I don't know. But that was the height of level of frustration that one would get to. So I got in the cab and went back to the house. And another time I remember getting very frustrated was the next day after Medgar was killed. We went to the Masonic Temple. Dave Dennis from CORE, his wife Maddie Bivens,
Who was our cousin.
and myself went to the Masonic Temple. And there were 2 white police officers sitting on motorcycles. And I ran up to them and started screaming, "Where were you last night? Why are you here now? Shoot, shoot, shoot us in the back like you did Medgar Evers. Shoot, shoot, shoot." Just screaming, just enraged. The amount of rage I can't even begin to describe. And it was anger, frustration, hurt, pain, everything that you could think of. And they sat there with their heads bowed. And only recently have I begun to think that they practiced nonviolence with me, because they never responded.
Do you think they were upset about his killing?
They never responded. They could have turned around and shot me.
I know, but do you think they may have also?
The insight is beginning to come to me as I get older and think that they looked sorry for themselves. They had their heads down. They never glared at me. They never looked at me. They never made any towards me gestures. They just sat there. And I was really enraged. And it only came to me recently that they were using the same tactics, nonviolence tactics, passive resistance, with me that we used with them.
They probably felt bad about it.
Well, I
Might have struck that little core of
Well,
humanity they may have.
Well, as you keep living, as Mother used to say, the more you live, the longer you live, the more you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And this is coming to me, these revelations are coming to me that was what was practiced. Because I've been told recently that a lot of whites in the South, and in Jackson in particular, did not care for that. Although I went to both trials and up for Medgar, and the first trial was all right, although I had to kick some white men's feet because they put their feet up on the bench and wouldn't let me sit down, and I kicked the foot and told them to move and then sat down. That's the type of temper I had.
We were
The judge told us we could sit anywhere we wanted. They wanted to prevent it. So the next trial, when the governor came in, they made us go up to the balcony with a cane behind my head, the sheriff, a big, thick cane. And the mistrial happened so quickly until we didn't know we had gotten caught. And only divine intervention happened at that particular time, because we were caught between the courthouse and the police station. And the Black Street, Ferry Street, was quite a distance. And we were trying to figure out how were we going to run away from this mob.
Right.
And who would drive up but one Jesse Morris. He said, "Do you all need a ride?" And we hopped in that Volkswagen bus and took off. These are the kind of things that happen, and that's why we are alive, because there was a greater power than us that was looking after all of us.
That's a lot of serendipity. But I remember seeing Ross Barnett walk into the trial of Meggers killers. And he went over and shook the hand. And he was no different. He was indistinguishable from the other Klan supporters sitting there. And I said, my God, there's... Another time, Dorie and I decided we were going to go to Barnett's inauguration.
Well, while you're on that, Mega's trial, each day when Beckwith would come in, the Klan would stand up and give him a standing ovation and applaud, and he would bow.
Yeah, I mean, he was,
And
it was like some famous rock star.
And the district attorney said, in choosing a jury, Medgar was a nigger. He lived over in nigger town. I didn't agree with what he did, and I know you don't either, but it's my job to uphold the law.
Waller?
Do you think it's wrong for a white man to kill a nigger? And that's the way the jury was selected.
That's what William Wallace said.
Yes.
Herman.
Yeah, the DA.
Pause for just 1 second.
Mhm.
Ms. Ladner, I don't mean to.
Go ahead.
I'm interested in this because it's one of so many indications of how extreme the stress and pressure was, even on, young and very energetic, as you say, healthy young people. I've read that you even were physically ill so many nights in Natchez because of the...
It was the stomach, and also eating greasy foods, the fried food. We ate at what was called the White House restaurant that was owned by some sisters who were independent. They had lots of land, and every time I would eat, the food would come up, fried chicken, and now to this day I watch my diet. I can't eat fried foods, and this is hereditary, I would imagine.
But I used to worry about her because I was off in the safety of graduate school, and I lived with so much guilt, just tremendous guilt, and worry for my sister, who was still back in the South, but not only in the South, but in Natchez, which had the most notorious reputation for being a dangerous place. And we kept in touch by phone, and I started working on her, telling her it was time for her to leave, to come, to get away. And eventually she did. She moved to St. Louis with me. But
You felt guilty because you had...
because
gone
I
to St.
left,
Louis.
because I left and went to graduate school. Yeah, I felt that I wouldn't have changed anything, but so, living with guilt, but at the same time feeling that you did what was best for you, is the worst combination in the world. It was awful.
I didn't see it that way.
But I did.
I saw what I was doing as something that I had to do, that I had to make some changes. The line was drawn in the sand, and I crossed the line, and I had to go for it because I did not want to live under the conditions that had come before me, and I didn't want to leave the conditions that way. So it's a passion with me.
I think all of us felt that what drove us was that we felt, number one, that we were doing the right thing. We never questioned whether or not the cause was not a just one. I mean, that was a foregone conclusion. But I think my sister endured a lot more dangerous situations by far than I did. But at the same time, I mean, I was in enough dangerous situations. But I always felt that I was always scared, and I didn't want to be around people in the movement who would say, "I'm not scared," because especially if they were Northerners, because they could get you killed very easily because they didn't have respect for the local traditions. And because we Southerners knew what those conditions were, we could decode them a lot quicker and easier, more easily than the Northerners. A lot of times they acted out of ignorance. But because my roommate, Joan Trumpauer, in my senior year at Tougaloo, for example, used to say, "I don't care about these people, they're not gonna do anything to me." And I said, "Well, you're not gonna get me killed." I used to carry around a black scarf in my pocket. And when we were driving back to Tougaloo College at night, on this long stretch of road called Hanging Moss Road, there were no lights. And Tougaloo was 8 miles from downtown Jackson. So I used to put her on the floor. And if she wouldn't get on the floor, I said, well, you got to put this scarf on because your long blonde hair is not going to get me killed. And because, people would have shot at us, even if they'd just known we were movement workers and all, and there were no whites in the car. But I came to understand, I guess, as I got older, that fear doesn't mean inaction. I mean, courage was the ability to act or to prevail in spite of one's fear. Because you could easily be paralyzed by your fear. In my mind, I was constantly working. I was sitting there, I remember once Lawrence Guillet told me in a SNCC meeting, he said, Joyce, if we listen to you, when you take everything to its logical conclusion, we wouldn't do anything. I said, well, I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to point, because my mind is always working on this hand, on that hand, da-da-da. This is what would happen in one scenario, this would happen in another. I said, but I didn't mean not to do it. I'm just thinking about what could happen.
Let me take you back for just a minute to a very specific material circumstances question. Could you describe the home you grew up in Palmer's Crossing?
The what?
The home. Our
And
home.
maybe the
What it looked like
just that
physically.
environment.
Our home or the
Yeah.
average home? It was, we had, what,
3
3
bedrooms.
bedrooms, living room, dining room, kitchen. What was the covering on the house?
Porch.
The house?
Brown siding.
Brown
brick siding,
siding.
we call it brick siding.
Yeah.
It was like it rolled up and you would pull it out and it looked sort of like imitation
And we had a
brick.
front porch.
It was on one lot, and we had, our younger brothers always had animals. Usually they were rabbits or
Dogs.
They always had animals.
Pets.
And we lived,
What type of pets did you have growing up?
A tightly knit community.
just in back of us was our great aunt and uncle. And then to the right of them was our grandparents. And so it was a modified compound that we lived in. And there were no fences, so we could go across the backyard. We were in our grand uncle and Uncle Archie and his wife, Miss Bettis, Aunt Icy's house. And next door to them was Miss
Ida and Mr. Bill.
Miss Mosley.
No, that was later.
Later, yeah. The grandparents, our stepfathers, mother and father, Bill and Ida Perriman. And then other people on the street in back of us were neighbors. Miss Katie, Mr. Joe, her husband,
Mr. Grady.
and Miss, what was Miss Grady's?
I forgot.
His wife's name, gosh.
I forgot her.
But they were all part of this extended nuclear family and community, and everyone interacted with you as though they were kind of family, a quasi-family. But very close by were our mother's brothers and sisters who lived in the broader community,
And
and
there were plenty of them.
a lot of them.
But down the street from us was
House of prostitution.
and that was
The
across
juke
the
joint.
street. Mr. Joe McCarthy had a still, whiskey still, and he made
Yeah.
bootleg liquor.
Right.
And every Monday, the sheriff would come,
Collect his money.
one-eyed Finch in his black Packard car. He would go up one side of the street with his hand stuck out,
Right.
and come
They
down the
paid
other
him off.
side with his hand stuck out.
One night, we had a lot of excitement. Down at Mr. McCarthy's house, he had gotten. There was these big tractor trailer trucks would bring in what we call seal liquor. He stopped bootlegging. He stopped making corn whiskey, and he started selling what we call seal liquor. And one Friday evening, we saw these National Guard trucks coming down, and they went down and they found his liquor. And
No, they started at Miss Bama's across the street. She had integrated prostitutes. They broke
Yeah,
her
we had white
slot
prostitutes across the street from
slot
us.
machines, and then worked their way on down to Mr. Joe McCarthy's and broke liquor all night long.
Yeah, they said there was a big rock and they opened these crates of liquor and they just break them against it. And you could smell liquor all over near where we lived. And they said the next morning, Mr.
Well,
Joe.
we could hear him sifting the liquor because the glass.
Yeah, he was sifting the liquor and trying to
He
retrieve.
owned a lot of he owned a lot of land.
Yeah, he was an
It was in
entrepreneur.
a wooded area. So the community that we grew up in, have you heard of Camp Shelby? Well, Camp Shelby used our community as an outpost for the
Recreational outlet for the black soldiers.
GIs, and so as a result, we had not a lot of
And so
gay life.
anything could go. I mean, the police allowed the juke joints and so on because they said ostensibly because the soldiers were nearby and they would come to the high, not
No, it
the
was
High
the
Hat,
Embassy
but the
Club.
Embassy Club and the Club Desire, the two nightclubs. And that's where all of the entertainers on the Chitlin circuit would come through.
Plus, we didn't live that far from New Orleans. It's not
And the Gulf Coast,
Gulf
Biloxi
Coast.
and Gulfport. So Hattiesburg was different than the Delta. The southern part of the state was less overtly repressive day to day than the northern part. And I'm hearing now that our schools were pretty good in Hattiesburg, Forest County. I know we had good teachers and so on, but apparently they ranked, the Forest County schools ranked higher than they did in other places. So I've been told. But we lived on, there was a dirt road, no paved streets at the time, and our address was Route 6, Block 69. There was a post office on the corner. 1 block from us was the school, the post office, and
Mr.
Hudson's little store. He started out in, one corner in this room would have been his little grocery store. And now his sons, who are our age, have stores all over the Southeast. They're Hudson salvage stores.
multimillionaires.
Yeah. And that was what we called the crossing. It was called Palmer's Crossing. That was the crossing. Now, the Illinois Central Railroad ran just across there. And that City of New Orleans train came through. And the Miss Katie, our neighbor's brother, used to throw the Chicago Defender out to us as he passed by. And sometimes some of the other
Reading material.
Pullman porters would throw papers and magazines out.
The description is so rich and good, and forgive me for moving.
You should do a movie on this
We-
sort of insulated.
We talked
rich
about it more
neighborhoods.
with Bernice, the same stuff, if you hear it.
With the Fremont Cloud program at Fremont?
No, with Bernice in
This is
'92.
back at,
You talked about
At
this
the
back in
Smithsonian,
the
yeah.
Smithsonian interview, yeah.
Yeah, you can go back and listen to it.
Yeah. Let me ask you then, just one quick clarification. Did I hear you say that the brothel was integrated?
Yeah, there was a white prostitute living there, and the clients were black men. The sheriff, Miss Bama, who lived across the street from us and she had a little nightclub, a little juke joint there, and her house was there. And every Monday afternoon when the sheriff, One-Eyed Finch, came by,
I guess we shouldn't use his name because for
why not?
reserve rights, his right
why
to
not?
privacy.
That's his name.
No, but legally we probably
Well, let
should.
them worry about the legal part.
Uh,
But what happened is that the sheriff, Miss Bama, would go out and sit in the car with the sheriff. And she was going with him, dating him. And they would sit there, and then eventually they went inside, and you'd see her taking the money out of her bra and handing him money. And I was a little budding sociologist even back then as a little child. I was always curious about all these things taking place. And then she and he got out of the car and went in her house. And I just assumed with my young man that they were having intimate relations. He come out an hour or so later. And what I wondered back then was, why did she have to pay him money and then have sex with him? I couldn't understand that as a young child. I mean, I was 10, 12 years old.
You had mentioned earlier just a few words about your mother, but how'd your mother, can you illustrate some of the ways your mother helped you understand how to navigate this world as two young girls coming up in a climate as
She
complicated
said,
and difficult as that?
go to school, get an education,
Because no one
work
can take it
and
from
take
you.
care of yourself. Don't depend on any man to take care of you.
And see, our mother had been divorced from my father when I was an infant. And she had, for a while, she had been a single parent to us. And that had a deep impression on her. She subsequently remarried our stepfather and had 6 children by him. But she always told her girls, all of her girls, to learn to take care of yourselves. And
Which has served us well.
yeah, because we became very independent very early. Now, what Mother also taught us was we observed the way she navigated. If a insurance collector came by the house, they never came in our house. She met them on the front porch. She didn't let them in the house. And they didn't make passes at her. There was a certain sense of pride and no nonsense behavior that she never let her guards down with them, not at all. And she kept them at distance. She did not kowtow. She did not allow them to make her feel that they were superior, ever. See, going back.
But that's the way she grew up.
Right, she grew up, my sister can talk about the family genealogy, but for generations before, see, my mother's was the 4th generation and ours the 5th, but 5 generations removed. I mean, they were descendants of a Creek Indian woman, Mary, and a white man named Ben. And Dorie did the genealogical research, but at one point they told us, they passed on a lot of folklore about him, and he said that he would not see his blood spilled across.
No, he wouldn't. He did not enslave his children because he did not want his blood
spilled
spilled
across
all over the world.
Country. And so,
And he was from Rockingham, North Carolina.
And so they grew up with a strong sense of Grandpa Ben said that we're as good as anybody. So that was passed on to each generation. It was almost like school. We heard these stories from our uncles and our aunts, and just such a sense of pride in who we are.
Plus,
they always call themselves cult.
Excuse me, in these communities, everybody was related, and whether they were black or white, and not formally, but informally, everybody was related one way or the other. And that is, you've been to the South, I'm sure you've seen it, and that's the way.
But they also had a very strong sense of independence and pride of self. Our uncles, for the most part of their lives, didn't work for other people. They were entrepreneurs.
They were taught not to work for other people.
Right.
By our grandfather. Work for yourself.
And so they didn't put themselves in a lot of environments where they had white bosses. For example, one uncle, Uncle Joe, used to repair electronic things. And one day he went to this white man's house. Man told him to come and fix his TV. And he said he saw the screen was all broken. And he said, well, what happened here? And the man told him, well, I saw this nigga on TV last night kissing this white woman, and I shot him. And we just all laughed. And my uncle said, don't you know that's crazy? I mean, why would you shoot him? You want me to fix it? So there's nothing I can do with your TV. And he turned and walked away. And you could see my uncle had good sense with this man. I mean, they're looking at a lot of white people who were like inferior to them in a way. I mean, that's the way they looked at them. And they didn't allow anyone to beat up on them or mistreat them, even when they worked for whites. They used to tell us these stories about how they got in a fight with this person, and we beat him up or whatever. And they were white, and I just sit there marveling. Oh, that's fantastic, because it was just the opposite image that you had of the downtrodden Negro. They just weren't like that, and so that was the model we got. And we felt that when we joined the movement, we were doing what they had prepared us to do. I mean, and they were all very proud
And
of it.
that
of us,
wasn't
too.
unique because in Natchez, it was the prevailing culture.
Let me ask about the shift as teenagers into movement activity, and especially after 1960. Before we started today, Dr. Ladner, you were talking about just that rush of feeling and so much excitement and a whole cluster of things. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The movement was the most exciting thing that one could engage in. I often say that, in fact, I coined the term the Emmett Till generation. I say that there was no more exciting time to have been born at the time and the place and to the parents that young movement people were born to. It was through an accident of history that we were that post-war generation in the South at the time who had the parents who taught us stand up for yourself, that all of that thing, I mean, you're talking about synchronicity and serendipity, all those things fell into place for a small group of young people, and that was our generation. We were post-war kids. Some of our parents had gone, fathers had gone abroad to fight for freedom, and they came back and they were so disappointed. We were that, of the era, we had been in the North, the suburbanization of America, you know, where the white kids' fathers were getting the jobs and they had the economics to this expansion and the material goods, and we saw that we weren't getting those. We were that generation that had been brought up with the fire and brimstone of believing the Old Testament prophets on justice and, you know, just a strong sense of right and wrong. It was the morality of our times, that we believed that it was according to the Bible, it was wrong to segregate people and to treat one group of people better than the other. We grew up with the liturgy of the Church, Baptist Church that we translated to the Civil Rights Movement with the songs and the preaching and the testifying, all that took place in those mass meetings. All of these were factors, and we were of that generation where most important of all was that all of us were imbued with this sense by our parents and aunts and uncles and our neighbors who said that you are the generation that will do better and your generation will change things. I remember so clearly Uncle Archie, who was in World War I, went to France, and he always told us, your generation is going to change things. And so there was these expectations of us, and I think we fulfilled them, but I don't believe it was through, you know, obviously it was not a matter of a king standing up in Montgomery and people saying, well, you're right. It was, for us, it was almost like you had to do it. It was a matter of time. The time had come. And they expected so much of us. Our teachers used to tell us.
We were the first, sometimes the first generation to go to college, too.
That was critical.
That was.
They said you got to get an education because no one can take that from you. And I think often of, my mother used to say that all the time, but she grew up at a time when people took their labor from them. They took everything from them and gave them little compensation for anything. Our stepfather made $30 or $35 a week as a skilled mechanic, diesel engine mechanic. His employer used to send him to New Orleans to his training courses. And he retired on Social Security, whereas the white men working alongside him, you know, had pensions. And they understood the injustices. And while they may have felt they couldn't do anything about it, there was this spirit of rising expectations that we would do it. And we had so many mentors. I remember one of our mentors was an herbalist. We called him Dr. McLeod. And we called him Cuz. He was a cousin of our aunt. And he used to come and sit on the porch and talk to Mother. And he was a member of the local Hattiesburg branch of the NAACP. He subscribed to the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender, Jet and Ebony magazines, and he read. So he would bring us books. He brought us, every week he brought us these publications. And
That was the only outside reading material that we got.
because everything was censored. And everything. The radio, there was one TV station in Hattiesburg, I remember when it arrived, and they would call you niggers on screen. And that outside information just fueled our curiosity and fed it and made us want to see the world and to do things differently. It gave us the window into how the outside lived. I mean, we saw that kids were going to college in Chicago and in Pittsburgh and all over the North. And it made us allowed us to see how other people were actually living, and that could be ours as well. But first we had to get rid of this little matter of segregation, discrimination.
Your first semester or first year at Jackson State would be a very
Right.
busy one.
Yes.
One that would
Yes.
knock you in another direction in terms of your
Right.
college.
See, we met Mega.
Well, I'll talk about that.
We met Mega Evers in high school when he came to Hattiesburg to
We used to go.
set up an NAACP youth chapter. He came down, but Clyde Kennard and Vernon Damer were the two people behind, really. The whole Hattiesburg NAACP chapter did, but those two were the motivating factors behind our chapter.
And the pianist, Vernon Damer's sister, played the piano in our church.
Her name was
Sister
Eileen Beard, and she was Mother's best friend.
Mother would let us go to NAACP meetings in Jackson with her and Mr. Damer. And since she was in the church, there was nothing
Mother
thought about
trusted
it.
her,
So, and our ears were wide open and taking it all in.
Yeah, Clyde Kennard, they drove up to Jackson and they took us with them. We were
And
little
Clyde
girls who were
Kennard-
interested in Negro rights, as we
Clyde
call them.
Kennard was our youth chapter advisor. But the tragic thing was that we were so young when he was jailed, and we knew that it wasn't right the first time he went on campus, and they said they found moonshine in his car. We were looking at it from a distance. We knew him. We didn't think that he would ever do anything like that, but it was so far away from him. And when he was incarcerated, he stayed in jail in Hattiesburg over a year. And we could go downtown and walk past the jail,
And you
but
wanted
never
to go up
dare,
there to see him, but you didn't dare try to even
go. And
We didn't even know how to negotiate going in to see him.
no, there was no movement of any sort
It was awful.
to filter into. But I later learned there was an underground movement, but these were all adults.
Yeah, we were kids. And the other thing you have to think about here is that you look at this from the perspective of 14, 15-year-olds who know these things are not right, and who would just love to someday figure out how to make everything right. But being very powerless. I will never forget how Dorie and I responded to Emmett Till's lynching. We used to go to the Hudson store every day at 4:20, 4:15, 4:20. That was when the city bus went through from downtown Hattiesburg out to Palmer's Crossing. And they brought the Hattiesburg American on that bus at 4:15, 4:20. And we ran up there with a dime every day and bought our copy of the newspaper. And I remember I used to clip the paper about Emmett Till's lynching and talk about feeling powerless and frightened, but also just like, this is awful.
Well, that was my realization that if these men are guilty, why aren't they being punished?
Right. And Dorie wanted to be a lawyer.
That's
then.
where the light bulb went off. Why aren't they being punished? And that's when I went on my quest to try and understand the whole legal system and equal rights and justice under the law.
Dorie used to have.
Let me finish. To talk about the Constitution, for instance. I went to my social studies teacher, Mr. Clark, and asked him, what does it 13, 14, and 15 amendments mean? He said, this has something to do with the Constitution. I went and found a copy of the Constitution and memorized these articles. The America's Creed, the preamble to the Constitution, all of this.
She used to repeat these all the time.
For my own empowerment. And that was something that I felt that I could do for myself, and maybe it would rub off on somebody else, but that's how powerless I felt. And these men are guilty. And I hope they don't come down here and get me, and I hope anybody else. And it was, Mississippi was the closed society.
The sense of vulnerability, I think, cannot be overemphasized.
No.
It was,
and we had two colleges there, Cary College and Southern. And Southern was so racist, where Clyde Kennard tried to enroll, they built a special dorm for the students from Latin America.
and they had a lot of South American students too.
They stayed in a separate dorm. They built it for them. They built one recently for the Native Americans to live in on the same at the same college right now. Yes, as we speak. So when we would go downtown, we would hear them speaking in this foreign tongue, but we didn't understand what they were saying. But it was a very curious kind of thing because we didn't see anybody but the people around us. And when Joyce and I would hear this, we want to know, who are these people, where they come from, what are they saying? And was just wanting to know more.
Curiosity.
Just wanted to know more, wanted to know what was beyond. We would go to New Orleans occasionally and to the Gulf Coast, but not very far out of that little circle. The church, school, and home, and family.
And with friends. But we also, sure.
Okay, well, I just want to say clearly for the tape that the case of Clyde Kennard was one that perfectly illustrates the way the white authority would trump up some charge just to take someone out of the landscape where he's beginning to work with black youth and so forth. Yeah.
Right. And we did not know anything about his background. At the University of Chicago was foreign to us.
We did know he was, in quote, smart.
Yeah.
We knew he was smart.
But later on we found out he was tutoring one of the Jewish kids there in Hattiesburg, whose father owned a big store.
Big department store.
And so, but he was very kind.
And very quiet, easygoing.
And Med Gavels was the same way. Now, we were teenagers, and they took the time with us. And this is the one thing about SNCC that I still marvel over and still think about. At my age, would I follow a 19-year-old kid somewhere?
Right.
And that was the way we were. We were presenting ourselves to the people in the community organizers.
And I think the reason a lot of these people took us seriously, most of them took us seriously, was because we took ourselves seriously. And because we weren't asking them to do something that we weren't already doing.
Well, we had a message also. That was a message,
resonated with them.
A message that they had been waiting to hear.
Right.
And the Christian Bible saying a little child shall lead them. And I think that was part of the whole thing too. But looking back at it and thinking they had lived hard lives, had worked very hard. And to get people to leave their jobs, a waitress in a cafe, or house maids and sharecroppers, to go to the courthouse in Indianola, Mississippi, where Miss Fannie Lou Hamer went in August of 1962, to get a busload of people to go and risk their lives and their jobs and everything else to go there and stay all day long. It's something that I marvel at right now, wondering how did it happen?
Where did they get that oomph?
But they were ready for it. The time was right. The time was right. This was 1962. So we talk about Miss Rosa Parks, and while we were sitting here talking, Emmett Till's death resonated because it was so publicized. I heard a little about Miss Rosa Parks, but there was not much information. All we knew was that black people were not riding the buses, and that was about it. But when Emmett Till's picture was shown, that was what blew
The iconic photograph
our mind.
was the image for our generation, to galvanize our generation. And all of us saw it. We saw it on the cover of Jet magazine.
And recently I was watching, 2 weeks ago I was watching TV One, and they had this documentary on, I can't call his name right now, but on Emmett Till, and Mrs. Mobley was talking, Emmett Till's mother was talking, and she was describing how he looked when she went to the funeral home. They wanted to bury him right then and there without opening the casket. And she went on, she said, no, I don't have time to faint. I don't have time to do this, cry and all this. So she described each part of his body. And all of a sudden, I told my daughter, I'm going to sleep. And this was 3 weeks ago. I could not, at this age, let that into my psyche. I just went straight to sleep and slept maybe 2 hours, and then I woke up.
So just about everyone I knew in SNCC,
cannot see it.
everyone I knew in SNCC, every black Southerner for sure, had seen that photograph, and it was like the clarion call for action. And that when we got older, we were going to avenge his death. I mean, I can remember feeling that so strongly. I remember clipping those Hattiesburg Americans each time there was an article about the Emmett Till case and the trial, and I kept a scrapbook. I wish I had kept it years. I remember one day taking it up to my play mama's house. We had these teenage girls who would be your play mama. They were like nice to you and so on, like a younger sister. And mine was Modell Stewart. And I remember one day taking this scrapbook to her house, and I remember lying on the floor on my stomach, flipping through it, showing it to her, and I remember crying and feeling so terribly vulnerable, but at the same time feeling that one day I'm going to do something about this. That was always the feeling, that you could see these horrible things happening to people, but one day it's not going to be like this because I'm going to help to change it. I'll never forget how the second lynching we experienced, was that of Mac Charles Parker in Poplarville, which is now 15 minutes from Hattiesburg. Back then it was probably 45 minutes on the old roads. And that was close to home. I remember the international media came to Hattiesburg because Hattiesburg had a hotel. It was the largest city they call it the hub city for these smaller towns nearby. And Dorie and I go up to town, as we call it, get on the bus and go to town and we stood on the streets listening to these international reporters with their foreign accents and speaking in a foreign tongue. And one time we were just pretending we were foreign too. We were just, we didn't know what we were saying. It was like making up words. But I felt that they're our friends. They were our friends because they're here to tell the world about this. And anytime I saw anyone that I felt was exposing what's going on, I felt a sense of empowerment. But I remember also after Mac Charles Parker was lynched, and as I said, it was so close to home that I remember my mother started pulling the boys and my father in closer, like, Fred, you better be, our brother next to me in age, Fred, be home before dark. It was like that natural, that protective instinct was to make sure that, because in a way, after a lynching, we felt there was a lot of fallout from it. It was not an isolated event. It empowered the racists, because they would stand out with their chests stuck out and they talk about the niggers, this and the niggers that they should have killed that nigger. I wish I'd been there. I would have done whatever to him. I would have kicked him too. I would have got me a shot on him. And so these were catalytic agents for, all the racism just to flourish out in the open. And so it was that which you feared as much as the actual event that had occurred as well, because it was like the climate coming forth. It's like Sarah Palin getting out here stirring up the Tea Party, like it's not just Palin, Michelle Bachmann, but when they come around and they start talking, then all the other people who feel like them come out as well, And that was the way I felt with these lynchings,
But the other side of it is the same perpetrators lived in the community and lived next door to
Exactly.
people, and everybody knew who they were. Such as the man the wizard who killed Mr. Vernon Damer. He lived in the black community, had a little store or whatever in the community. Everybody knew who he was.
And you couldn't do anything about it.
No, and one of the most, while I'm thinking about it, one of the most horrendous times that I experienced was when we went to found COFO in August of 1962 in Clarksdale, Mississippi. This was my first time going to the Delta after Emmett Till and all this had happened. Bob Moses, Dave Dennis, Matty Dennis, Cody Liddell, and I'm not sure, quite a few of us went up there. And Clarksdale had a curfew. I didn't know that. All blacks off the street at 12 midnight. And when we got into the church, shortly after we got into the church, here comes the fire truck. There's no fire here. And so when the meeting was over, we were all subject to being arrested for passing the curfew that we didn't know anything about, on our way trying to get to Jackson, and it was darker than 1,000 midnights in the Delta. If you've been up there, you don't see anything but the stars. And so Dave Dennis was driving our car, and the police got us before we got to Mount Bayou, which is the all-black town. And so we stopped along this dark road, and the police took him to his car and talked about him. Dave is of mixed heritage. He discussed that with him. Then he told me he was going to take him to jail. And so Dave came and told us to follow him back to Clarksdale to the jail, and because he was going to lock him up. So we didn't know anything about the Delta. And Lester McKinney, who was one of the Freedom Riders from Nashville, was driving the car. And so when we got to Clarksdale, to the jail, one officer said, "Get the F out of Clarksdale." And so here we are riding around and around and around and around trying to find Amson Moore's house. Amson Moore was a World War I veteran who had done a lot of work in Mississippi with the NAACP. And
One or two. World War II was.
It may have been two, but
Yeah.
he would have been maybe two. But anyway, he was known, had a reputation for trying to
Being very
work in the
courageous.
community, and very courageous man who would go out of his way. He hosted Bob Moses and so forth when Bob came down. And so we were trying to find his house in Cleveland. And we rode around and around, and it was daylight, like 6 o'clock. We had to go through Ruleville, and we had been told that Milam, one of the men who killed Emmett Till, was the night watchman in Ruleville. And the blacks were to be off the streets there at 10 o'clock at night. And so when we got to Ruleville, I said, "Lester, don't go 20 and don't go under 20. It was like you were paralyzed with fear. And those are the conditions that people were living under. And maybe some still are, I don't know, but it was, and then we said, we're gonna do something about this right there in the Delta. And that's how we decided that we were gonna go and work in the Delta, go and work with the sharecroppers and bring people like Miss Hamer to the courthouse to register. And that was where we stopped, right there.
Exactly. Let me, before we go, wait just one second.
You did a lot of genealogy research at the Library of Congress. What were you looking for, and what did you find?
That's
Okay.
on my list of
Okay.
questions, and we will come to that
Okay.
in due course.
Sure.
Yep.
It's obviously
Yep.
an important issue.
Yeah, I thank you. That's a very, and I want to ask just one quick question along the way. I'm thinking back of the work, how you were drawn to the Youth Council, and met Medgar Evers. Did you ever meet Mildred Bond Roxborough,
Never heard of it.
national official? And it's okay. She was also a series contributor. I just wondered if in that context you.
We met Ruby Hurley, who was the Southeastern director of the NAACP.
Sure. Yeah. Let me have you. I'm very interested if each of you would talk a little bit about your first experiences going in to do local organizing, to the breaking that you mentioned in the Delta and in that context, early 60s, 62-ish. Yeah.
Now, the difference between us was that I always had one foot in the University College and one out, and Dorie dropped out of school. Dorie told me once, "Joyce, I can't stay in school and know my people are suffering." And I was always trying to figure out how I could do both. So when she left college, I was very upset, but at the same time, I knew that was her calling. And I always did my movement work alongside my campus work. I was more campus-based in a way, but still spent time, out in the community organizing as well.
Well, the experience that I just described to you about going into the Delta in 1962, this was also the time that James Meredith was enrolling in Ole Miss. So it was a particular horrendous time for the state of Mississippi. And I made a decision. I had left home that summer. Joyce went to Chicago and to California with our uncle, Fontaine. And I decided to go and work with Bob Moses in Jackson for my freedom, as I told my mother on my way out the door with my little orange suitcase.
Funny. She said,
And
she waited until...
Wait a minute, let me tell my own story, please.
Go ahead.
I said,
All
Mother...
right.
Well, shouldn't I? I said, Mother, I packed a few little pieces. I had a little small orange suitcase. I said, Mother, I'm going to go to Jackson and work with Bob Moses to get my freedom, as I was going out the door to go downtown to catch the Greyhound bus. And Mother turned around to look, but Mother had other children there. And so I went on downtown, got on the bus and went to Jackson and to the Freedom House on Rose Street.
And Mother turned to me and said, what'd she say? She's going where? And so I was left to explain where she was going.
And you went to California that summer.
Well, I went to Chicago to work, and then I went with them to California.
Mm-hmm. And so that particular summer was the first summer that I had really dedicated my whole life has been dedicated to the cause. And from what I experienced that particular night on the roadside there in the Delta, and curfews, which I had never heard of, made me more determined to do something about the social change in that state and throughout the United States of America. And the other thing was that this energy that the Freedom Riders brought to the state of Mississippi. See, these were young people. We had been at Jackson State, and James Meredith was one of our strategists
Right.
at Jackson State. And we had gone to demonstrate in behalf of the Tougaloo 9 and tear gassed. But James Meredith was a great strategist, very clear-headed and level-headed, but we had no idea he was going to Ole Miss.
No, he never mentioned
But then we were tortured socially and otherwise at Jackson State.
We got expelled too.
Yeah. And see, Meg Evans' office was across the street. And every Wednesday we would go over there and talk to him about our freedom, which was abstract. All we wanted to know was about our freedom. We're going to get our freedom one day. And
Well,
we
one day
really
we
didn't
also
know
asked him about what's going on with the movement, about Negro rights around Mississippi, because we'd ask him, and he said, well, I went up to the Delta, or one day he came on the campus and brought me some money because he had been in Hattiesburg, was in a grocery store, and he met Mother. I mean, I don't know how they got to know who each other was, but she gave him some money, and he brought it on campus to give me. And we wanted to be a part of the Tougaloo 9. We asked him if we could join. He told us there was going to be a demonstration. We asked, can we join? At first he said, yeah, that would be good. And then he said, on the other hand, no, because he started thinking about it. He said, you would be expelled immediately because you can't sign out to go to the public library. And he said, well, why don't you do something on the campus? And Dorie was president of the dorm council, and we always prayed before events occurred. And we decided that she'd call on me to give a prayer. And
it wasn't by design.
I talked about the dark days.
Council meeting, and I asked her to pray.
But it was because
it wasn't by design.
Okay, I talked about the dark days ahead.
And the matron of the dorm was one from the darkest ages, from the cave
Miss
day
Rose
ages.
was her name.
And she immediately went and told the dean that a prayer had been prayed. And we come from this little small community, the Bible and this grocery store.
Everyone prayed before any event. They
so,
still do in the South, you know.
They wanted to know about the prayer. And of course, we got very combative at that point. How dare you question a prayer? And we didn't realize that we were going to talk back, and the leadership thing started rising up. And we defended ourselves. Oh no, you're not going to question us and question our prayer.
Dorie said, how dare you
you
question my relationship with my God?
and so forth. So pressure started building, and when we decided to march in on behalf of the Tougaloo students, we were tear gassed, and we had an early spring break.
Look, he called the spring, President Jacob Reddick called the spring break early to calm things down. When we came back a week later, Walter Williams, who's now a judge in Chicago, had been expelled. He was the president of student government. He was expelled. And it was toward the end of that semester that we were called in by the same dean, Oscar Rogers. He died 2 weeks ago.
Oh, he did?
We talked to him and made peace with him last year.
You didn't really make peace with him. You were still trying to find out why he did what he did.
Well, I did. I wanted to know.
I made peace with him, but he was sick, and she
I
was
made
still.
No, I was not. It was not personal. I was trying to find out
But-
did the president tell him to expel us? It was, for me, it was a matter of getting to the bottom of what.
And he didn't divulge any information.
Oh, we did say.
No.
No. But now this man had attended Tougaloo College,
Right.
Harvard University, and a divinity school. You would think that he would have some liberal qualities about him, but he was enforcing the law
Right,
more
he
than
enforcing the rules.
anybody.
As you think back about that, your explanation, the most likely explanation for your expulsion would be?
Expulsion? He told me, Dean Rogers told me, that, and you heard him say that we were
We
the
mocked.
most intimidating people, and we mocked. He saw
We
the
mocked the
president
president.
walk past, and we mocked him,
I got,
and
I
he had
got
never
behind him
felt.
and I was like,
He had never felt so humiliated at that by that red light is on over there.
your questions, since we've been talking.
We're back after a short break. Let me just note for the record that Corinne Bishop has joined us as well, John's niece. So, Dr. Ladner, Ms. Ladner, I wanted to ask just for a quick description of the Freedom House in Jackson, its rhythm and its character, and
Oh, it was a unique place, and having grown up in a large family, it was not uncomfortable for me. The cast of characters, which included Lawrence Guyot, Coley Liddell, who was from Jackson, had attended Tougaloo and was also worked for Medgar Evers, would come and cook for us because although I grew up in a large family, I didn't learn to cook. I had to take care of the children, the younger children.
And I cooked.
And the house was, I think, initially rented by the Freedom Riders.
Yeah, it was a big
Paul
white structure.
Brooks and Catherine Brooks and Diane Nash, James Bevel.
Lester
And-
McKinney.
That's Lester McKinney. But it was a place that everybody could stay under one roof. And I was looking at some notes that I had come across recently about how we would question each other and talk about strategy and so forth. And it was a learning experience because I was learning. Let me back up. My first experience meeting the Freedom Riders was like, oh my God, where have you been?
Right.
Where have you been? And it was at the Masonic Temple upstairs by Medgar's office. And Tom Hayden, Charles McDough, Marion Barry, John Lewis,
Dion Diamond.
Diamond, and Diane, all these young people were there, and it's like, oh my God, I've been looking for you since I was 14 years old.
Right.
And so they stayed in the state to do organizing, and that was the catalyst that we needed in order to continue the work that we had, Joyce and all of us had envisioned there in Mississippi. And it took them to come in to just break it open. And they had the support of the local community. Women United, Women Power Unlimited had organized for the Freedom Riders. There was a lot of advocates there for the Freedom Riders from the local community. So the network was vast. And once the Freedom Riders came in, that gave the infusion in the power. And that's every Friday we would go in to do
At the end of classes.
to do community organizing and to learn. And that was on my
First time
way.
I remember the Freedom Riders in depth. I remember that, seeing them over there, but I also remember them on campus. We got to Tougaloo. The Freedom Riders had come back for their hearing, and it was early September, and I saw all these people, whites and blacks, sitting out on the lawn and just, relaxing and so on. And I remember asking someone, I think it was the roommate, who are those people out there? And she said, oh, those are the Freedom Riders. I said, what? I mean, it was extraordinary because we had wanted to go on the Freedom Ride, and our father and uncle told us we couldn't do it. We'd gone to Chicago for the summer
to work.
but we wanted to join the Freedom Riders. The reason they told us we couldn't was because it was so dangerous. And that was the last time we ever asked anyone if we could do anything. From then on, we just went ahead and did it.
Someone told me that they saw a record where Judge Russell Moore had put me out of court. I attended a trial with one of the Freedom Riders, and one of the police officers was telling so many lies, and I was sitting there looking, and the judge kept looking at me, and then finally he said, will a young lady in a black dress get up and leave? And I got up and stomped and threw my head and went on out the door. But it's recorded somewhere because someone told me that they saw it. But it was one of the Freedom Riders' trial. But it was so transparent. The lies were so transparent until you just couldn't help but sit and marvel. And I'm one who usually gives myself away by looking.
Expressions.
Yeah, expressions.
Rather severe.
Did someone caught that on film, you said?
No,
sorry.
It's
no,
written about.
someone has written it.
It's written about, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
When I was in jail, Judge Cox, the federal Fifth Circuit, was so evil. He referred to us as niggers, in the courtroom. And I had, when I went back to Jackson to the 50th Freedom Rider reunion last summer, I met a young black man who replaced Judge Cox. It was the most amazing thing. I couldn't believe. He said, I told him, I said, when he was introduced at this dinner, and that he was on the Fifth Circuit, and I went up to him afterwards, and I said, I was tried by Judge Cox, and he said, I replaced him. I said, you gotta be kidding. I said, this is poetic justice I've ever heard of it. I couldn't believe it. It was truly remarkable, 50 years later.
Let me ask you, I'm sorry, let me ask you both all the work that was done in Mississippi that you were right in the middle of, especially Ms. Ladner, on voter registration, the MFDP. Maybe we could enter into that and touch on that very, very important work by letting me have you say a little bit about Victoria Gray Adams.
She's our cousin. Well, we remember her from the time we were little kids, because what was so remarkable about her, number one, she was very beautiful, pretty woman. And number two, she went away to college. We knew people who went to Alcorn College, Jackson State. She went to Wilberforce. And we said, that's far away out. We want to go away to college too. She was Victoria Gray Adams.
Wilberforce, you were just mentioning.
Yeah, she went away to college, and I remember we were little kids at the time, but I remember it so well. And I remember also when she went to live in Germany because she got married to Tony, and when she came home from Germany, it was another way of looking at her as a very exotic person because she'd lived abroad. And we were, I guess, in college when she became active in the movement, first by working with SCLC's citizenship education program. and then she joined SNCC. And we were away a lot of the time when she was doing her work, but she gained stature as she got more and more involved. She was always Victoria, our cousin Vicky.
Well, she was number one, an independent entrepreneur.
Yeah. She sold cosmetics and hair products.
She was always open and engaging, and very, very intelligent, and never put herself above the youth. She was always on the level and would listen to what you had to say.
That was a common characteristic of all the people, older people.
And so when she came in, it was she was in Hattiesburg for a long time. Guyot was in Hattiesburg. I chose not to work in Hattiesburg because of my residency there. But she joined up with Guyot and some Frank Smith and some others, and she would come to Jackson in her high heel shoes and her tight dresses.
She dressed well too.
And very skilled orator, a very skilled orator.
She's really smart.
Very bright, and magnetic personality. Magnetic personality.
I used to.
When she died, it really pained me. It still pains me. When I go to meetings, I look for her because we always sat next to each other. Yeah. And it's something that is just part of me. Yeah. But she was a teacher and confidant, strategist.
She was proud of us too, because she knew that we were little kids, who came out of Palmer's Crossing and made our way slowly into the world. And she had a sense of pride in her little cousins,
I'm sure she was, and I know she was, in fact, in Atlantic City.
Yes.
64.
Right.
Maybe we can use her presence there as kind of an opportunity to talk a little bit about Atlantic City and MFDP and that moment in the movement's evolution.
And a little about how we got there too,
sure.
because it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of people were jailed, beaten, and getting there, the organizing, a lot of work went into it. And to take an integrated group to Atlantic City.
But that summer,
Tremendous violence.
that summer.
Bombing and so forth. And also, Swerner Chain Goodman had been murdered, and that was another
And we
thing.
knew Mickey Swerner and James Chaney from the Mississippi movement. They were staff people, who were always in Jackson at the staff meetings. Mickey wore a little goatee. He and Rita had just come down from that January, I guess, from, I know he had been at Brooklyn College, maybe she was as well. They hadn't even gotten seasoned. I mean, they were seasoned because it didn't take long to get seasoned to become a seasoned volunteer. Because it was a baptism of fire. As soon as you got there, you got thrown in feet first. But I remember all the debates that we had about about how to approach, see, all of our projects there were two types of projects. One is that we were actually doing the strategic work of helping to get people registered to vote, to gain power. And the other level was to take some of those same events as well as create others that could be sort of pushed out to the national stage to bring attention to the injustices in the South, in Mississippi. Now, for example, I remember Freedom Day in January 1964 in Hattiesburg was the precursor to Freedom Summer. And the MFDP, you can only organize for so long to get people registered to vote before you bring attention to the fact that these same people, not only can they not vote, but they can't be a part of the political party. And so we started organizing the.
And we had the mock ballot. If I could vote, I would vote for Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Right,
And you had Barry Goldwater.
the freedom ballot, we
And so
called it as well.
went all over I know in
I was-
Natchez, we went all over Adams County with these, and we had to have these as testimony to also attest to the fact that we weren't registered to vote.
Right.
And
We
this was-
documented everything.
And this was taken to the government as well.
So in each area,
And then we had the precincts. We organized the same way you would any political
precinct meetings,
process.
and then the district-wide, and then the statewide. I think it was early August
Yeah, and Danny Lyons,
that we had the state.
in Danny Lyons'
Let me finish.
book, there's a picture of Freedom Day, and Miss Baker, Ella Baker, is given the credit for MFDP, the concept of MFDP. She was our leader. We didn't follow leaders, but she was the
We
one who
respected
came up
her,
with
and
the
because
concept.
she taught us how to listen to each other, but she also taught us. She respected us so much that she would stand along the side of the wall in meetings, and we'd argue and argue and argue, and then she would. Someone would call for the question, and she would guide you with an unseen hand to eventually arrive at some kind of a consensus. But I
More
remember,
importantly, she separated the students from the SCLC. That's how SNCC
Yeah,
came into
yeah.
being.
Exactly.
now I remember the statewide convention was held at the Masonic Temple. This is a statewide Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party convention. And after the delegates were chosen, then I remember riding up to Atlantic City in a convoy of cars with Cleve Sellers and Ivanhoe Donaldson, and each person in SNCC had a skill, and I like to think of the drivers, the very, very important skill that was used to drive as a driver, a SNCC driver of the Sojourner fleet of cars. Rubidoris Robinson named him the Sojourner fleet, by the way. And because you had to be able to drive in very dangerous places. You had to get in and out of places like Dorie was describing earlier, being up in the Delta. And you had to outrun the cops. And we drove in a convoy of cars up to Atlantic City. We stopped in Denmark, South Carolina, at Cleve Sellers' parents' home. And we showered, changed, and his mother cooked a great meal. Then we went on the second leg of the trip on up to Atlantic City. And we had walkie-talkies too. So, the cars, we traveled in a fleet together. So I think it was about 3 cars together. I'll never forget that trip up there. And then once we got there, I remember I stayed at the Y.
I stayed in a little small hotel.
Yeah, that was the convention, the FDP's hotel, convention hotel.
And we had the burned out station wagon on the boardwalk.
Right.
For the whole world to see.
Warner, Cheney, and
Can you
Goodman.
explain that just a little bit more, what that burned out car was?
It was a car that Michael Swerner, James Cheney, and Andrew Goodman were driving when they were arrested and killed by the sheriff and deputy and local people in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
And they burned it up, the car afterwards.
And the Choctaw natives found it in the swamps, in the woods there in Neshoba County.
And we towed that car up to Atlantic City, put it on the boardwalk, and different people stood there and explained what it was as people at the convention stopped. And I remember standing there, and people wanted to know, what is that, what is that? And then once you told them that this is what the three civil rights workers were driving before they were killed, then it just took on, it was this symbolic manifestation of just the most utter type of fear, and they could understand. See, one thing we understood the movement, and I'm not sure how, as young as we were, how we came to understand that, but we showed people what it was like as much as possible. It was a tactile thing, like lots of photographs, a lot of booklets we put together. literacy books, teaching plantation workers literacy. I mean, you might have a sentence that one sack of cotton weighs 80 pounds, another weighs whatever, and total is 160 pounds. But we used things from the environment. And so taking that car to the boardwalk in Atlantic City for everyone to see that this is what the three civil rights workers were driving. And then, you've heard that they were murdered, bodies were found, and they burned this car like this, and people were just, wow. And they said, we can understand why this Mississippi segregated delegation shouldn't be seated.
And I had seen them at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, as they were leaving to return to Mississippi because we'd gotten this call that the church had burned, and Mickey, of course, and James would immediately return. And Andy jumped in the car. He was a volunteer. He had not been to Mississippi before. So we went out to the car and told
Waved
them to be
goodbye.
careful. And word came back that they had not been heard from through the Watts line. And I remember in the meeting, volunteers were running around, full of energy. And then we said, this is very serious, very serious. And Herbert Randall captured a picture of me, you may have seen it, with my arm out wearing a white blouse. And he explained to me what happened was that I was talking and explained the seriousness of what was going on, that we knew they were dead.
Yeah.
And then I took it outside and continued to talk. And then he captured a picture of me sitting there with my head bowed. We all knew they were dead because you had so many hours or minutes to check in.
Right.
Once you didn't check in, then we would start calling. And but we blamed the federal government for not intervening earlier, and they could have been saved because I heard recently that some of the cooks who worked at the jail had told people in the community that they
Get the word out that they're in the jail.
And they didn't. And that was something that we had to live with, and really,
It was awful.
really disturbed us.
What I often have thought about over the years is we were so young to have been exposed to so much death and so much violence. And some people, what we call our walking wounded, they didn't survive it intact. I mean, the movement destroyed them. I won't say the movement destroyed them, but they were the casualties of the movement, and we don't talk about them enough. But to be 18, 19, 20, if you were 25 in SNCC, you were older, considered old. But to be 18, 19, 20 years old, and you're exposed to all this danger and all of this violence and all of this fear all the time, it's a wonder that as many people survived as did. It's truly remarkable, I think.
When they came to attempted to blow our house up, our office up in Natchez, they blew up the wrong house according to the fire chief. I asked him whose house was that. It was ours, and they had bombed through a Molotov cocktail in this cafe that belonged to an integrated couple. According to the police chief, he had known them since he was a kid, with Jake Fishman and his black mistress. And so there were a mob of people there. We got word that our office had been blown up, so we ran over there. Every white person in Natchez knew it was going to be blown up but us. So when we got there, they were standing all around us like in an alley, and we had to go through there. And Mr. Archie Curtis, the funeral director, was there with his attendant. So we felt that we had to go inside and get the names of the people who had signed up with us on the 4x4 cards. And prior to that, John Dorie had been sending 2 Justice Department officials down there, young white guys with sawed-off shotguns. They let us see them. They said they weren't coming anymore because it was getting too dangerous. They would come to check on us every week to see if we were alive. And so they weren't coming back. And this is when they attempted to blow up the office. But to make a long story short, we went, Mr. Curtis said, I'll take you all in there to get those names, and nobody's going to bother you. And so we went inside. We had to turn the light on, and come out. We went through the mob of people and got in the car and drove back to Mr. George Metcalf's boarding house. And the phone rang all night until I told this woman who kept calling, Dorie, you MF, this, that. I said, you know what, Little Richard is coming to the town. I said, do you like Little Richard? Yes, I like Little Richard. I said, well, if you don't call me no more, I'll get you a ticket. You will, Dorie? I said, yes, I promise you I'll get you a ticket. Okay, Dorie, thank you so much. And it was,
There was a lot of danger. I remember.
Insanity.
Right, it was schizophrenia.
And
Because,
so,
I mean, the split psyche that W.J. Cash wrote about in Mind of the South is so appropriate here. I remember being in Greenwood in the spring of 64, or was it 63, and the police, not the police, but I worked in the SNCC office all day that day, and I was one who didn't mind doing office work. So, and then that night, I left the office about almost midnight. Went home, learned that they'd blown up the office that night. Next morning, got up and found out about it, went in there and cleaned up all the files, retrieved everything possible. And I don't think, I mean, aside from the momentary danger of it, you say, oh, that's horrible. But we didn't skip a beat. You know, the next day we were out there again trying to get people to go down to going with people down to Greenwood, LaFleur County courthouse to register to vote. And these police dogs are chasing us, and then along comes someone hollering, "Where's the payphone? Where's the payphone?" And I said, she said, "I want to call the Justice Department." And I stopped at the Justice Department. You want to call the Justice Department? I didn't know any black person who knew anyone in the Justice Department to call. So I was taken aback. I found that more curious than the dogs chasing us. So I turned around, and it turned out to be Marion Wright, who was at Yale Law School, and she had spent the summer interning at the Justice Department, but she was there that spring break working with us in Greenwood, voter registration campaign. And I told her about that years later, and she said, and you know what, I was calling John Dorie, and she said, you know what he told me? I said, what? She said, he told me, calm down, and tell me what happened. I said, in the midst of the dogs chasing us, that was easy for him to say.
and one thing that I left out about the bombing was that there was a local young lady from Natchez, black, with us. She had the audacity to faint, fall out on the ground. And what was I going to do with this? If you choose to faint here,
Right.
I'm stepping over you, we're going in the office, and I'll leave you here. I don't know what happened to her, but that was the mindset. You don't.
No, you didn't have time to
No.
do certain things,
No.
and you didn't faint. But I had the amazing capacity that I didn't know I had. I've analyzed it many years later, to be in dangerous situations and separate myself from it almost. It was like almost being out of body. Like the next morning, I got up and cleaned up the files and didn't even really deal with what had just happened emotionally. I just didn't deal with it.
Forgive me, we're so relatively close to the end of
Okay,
the time.
sure. Why don't you ask what you
So
got?
let me just, I definitely want to ask a few things to make sure that we can capture your sense of a few things as we close out here. And I'll have time for any final comments from you as well. Dr. Ladner, you mentioned the term that's used in a kind of informal way to talk about the people who've suffered from witnessing all this violence, the walking wounded.
Right.
And I wonder if there are any things that you would like, either of you would like to talk about the legacy of that violence, being so close to that much violence, both personally enduring it and witnessing it at close hand.
Well, and now this day that the term terrorism is used, it doesn't faze me because I've lived through all of that. I've lived through it. I've seen
That was
bombs
terrorism.
thrown into churches, into homes, more than I can count right now. So, and being chased, I didn't know how to drive at the time. And I would always sit in the back seat of a car because for fear that whoever was driving and another driver would sit in the front seat for fear if a guy would come by in a pickup truck with a rebel flag and a gun, shoot,
You ducked.
that the next person would take over the wheel. As Jimmy Travis was shot in Mississippi
Greenwood.
in 1963. So there are some things now that flash across my mind, like PTSD at times, and you don't realize it until it surfaces. So, but the violence part, when 9/11 happened, when that it doesn't affect me in the same way because I've personally lived through it, so I don't get all upset.
You've been so sensitized to this.
It's something that happened, and I'm not condoning it, but it's something that you just sort of,
It's
it's
more
in
violence.
your whole psyche, and
I don't think I've dealt with a lot of things that happened. I think I just sublimated a lot of stuff. And I believe a lot of it went into my work. I believe that I worked very, very hard because I loved working. And I pushed myself. I was driven, just very driven in my work. And I think that a lot of it came from not only being a very active, engaging mind that caused me to want to, seek more knowledge and write books and do research and so on, be an administrator, teacher, and all those things. But I think also it was to keep me. I didn't have to remember a lot of things either.
And I spent several years working in level 1 trauma unit, and for me it was like a out-of-body experience. Also, although working with sudden death and all this kind of stuff, I was like prepared to work with it. And although I said I never want to say that I've gotten used to the sight of blood, that means I'm no longer a human. But I was sort of desensitized to a lot of stuff that I saw tragedy.
I'll tell you, but in spite of all that, my very worst moment in the entire movement came on early that morning, 6 a.m. or so. One morning, my mother called to say Mr. Damer was killed. It was 6 to 6. I'll never forget it. I was in graduate school in my apartment, and I just stood there and broke down and just started screaming and crying. After all those years of repressing so much, and what I couldn't understand, because I never reacted entirely emotional to things. I always usually filtered through my mind first, and I couldn't understand how he lived through the worst, the most fearful, terror-ridden time of the movement, and then to die after all of the violence, after the most violent period. That I couldn't reconcile.
Let me,
Oh, one more thing about Atlantic City. We were assigned to work with, to lobby with different members of the Freedom Democratic Party delegation. And I was assigned with Mr. and Mrs. Hartman Turnbow. Mr. Turnbow, we always called his wife Miss Sweets. And we were to lobby the Oregon delegation with Edith Green, Congresswoman Edith Green, and Senator Wayne Morris. And I'll never forget going into the hotel, into the suite, not a beautiful suite in this hotel, like a penthouse. Edith Green was wearing a beautiful caftan. And Mr. Turnbow presented the case of the FDP very clearly, and then Mrs. Turnbow was very quiet. She never said anything. She was carrying a brown paper bag. She had a pistol in it. I always thought that was just so fantastic. I thought that was a gas, man. I loved it. Their home had been blown up, and then he was jailed for being the bummer of his own home. So she didn't trust these people in Atlantic City. She had a gun. I thought it was, when you're young, you just see the irony and all kinds of stuff. I thought that was great.
Well, most people had guns.
yeah.
A lot of people had guns, and they didn't say anything about it.
You just mentioned irony that there are, well, I don't know if it's irony quite, but there are so many layers of complication to sort out in relation to the question of your experience that came out of the genealogical work, which is that, of course, there's this whole contemporary white side of the family, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very interested in if you'd like to.
Well, it came from living in my mother's family, especially, I didn't live around my father's side because they all moved to Chicago and California. And my mother and her brothers were always different, meaning that they were mulattoes or Indians or whatever. And they would talk about their life. And Ben Woolard was a
Grandpa Ben, they call him.
deputy, was a man who caught the Copeland gang, and so
Spotter.
So they call him a squatter, yes.
Spotter. Spot, like
Yeah,
you spot
yes,
these
POTT,
crooks.
yeah. So I was intrigued, and also was intrigued by my mother's family because they were different from most people in the community, the hair and the coloration and so forth. So
They looked Indian.
and I, after listening to Canadian broadcasting one night in 1992, they were making a movie in Jackson, Freedom Song. So they announced on the radio that the Canadian broadcasting that the archives were open in Jackson, Mississippi for black people. That was 1992. They had finished all the slave records and you could go in and use them. So I took the opportunity to go and start doing the research. All of my mother's siblings were alive at that time. They lived to be 80, 90 years old. And I started collecting information. And the more I got into it, it became like a disease, which it still is. So to make a long story short, you know, when you're doing research, people also doing research, the same kind of research, and someone saw that I was researching the same great-grandfather that this family was, and so they were approached and said that you may want to know this or you may not want to know it. The one in Georgia was approached by a lady in Alabama who was doing her research, so they said, I want to know, and they had a sister in England. So of course we want to know. So I received a letter from England, from London, England, saying that we may have the same great-great-grandfather, and I would like to communicate with you and send photographs, exchange photographs. And that's how it happened. And we met in Mobile, Alabama. And we met again in 1998. And we had two reunions, and we went to the family cemetery at where my mother had grown up in Battles, Mississippi, Wayne County. And to look at the cemetery and also to eat. And I spent a great deal of time going into cemeteries looking for Benjamin F. Woolard, who was born in 1805 in Rockingham, North Carolina. And we didn't find what we found Benjamin Woolard Jr., who was in the Confederate War. And from the information that both sides collected was that Benjamin Woolard had around 11 children, 13. And five by our great-great-grandmother Mary, who was described as a Black Creek Indian, but she probably may have been Seminole, coming from that part. And they both were born in 1805, and they both came from North Carolina to the Alabama-Mississippi Territory together, and they lived together. And the first child, Frank, was born in 1825, and our great-grandfather was born, Jerry Woolard was born in 1870, around 1869, 1870. And he was the father of my grandfather, Joseph Collins Woolard. And Joseph Collins Woolard married Martha Gates, our grandmother, and they begat 11 children, and my mother was the 5th of 11, Annie Ruth. And mother was born May 14, 1921, and she died January 23rd, 1995. Now my father's side is so...
he's got some, stop.
Forgive me, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah.
I thought she said he had something.
Oh,
No, he was.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. If you'll forgive me for the interruption. I'm just interested in your thoughts about this experience of, if you'd like to share, I have another question too I can finish with if that's not really something you want to talk about. This element, you know, in the 90s of encountering Was part of the family, was distant part of the family?
Oh, well, we knew it was there all the time. It was never any.
They were surprised about our existence. We weren't surprised about theirs.
But my mother used to have a relative coming to visit her, cousin Annie Ruth, so
He was white.
yeah, so it was no deal.
Sure.
And my sister Joyce and I are probably the only identifiable black Ladners in the country. Those who claim color, yeah. So,
I see.
The resistance comes on the white side.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the white
Well-
Woollards don't want, or descendants of the Woollards can't find any other white Woollards.
Yeah.
And they
and the,
make all kinds of excuses as to,
well, they just melted, and the Ladners, this large Creole family in Louisiana, which includes Brett Favre and Jimmy Buffington, and many others. The Favres do have integrated reunions. Jimmy Buffington is from that line and so forth, but they decided early on that they would rather stay in the white race than the black race.
Final question. We're right at the end of time. I'm sorry that we don't have lots more time, as I would enjoy being with you for that. Are there parts of the civil rights narrative that you really think need attention to be recrafted or adjusted?
Well, mine is
deserve more attention.
Mine is mainly the schools of children to know the history part, because at Texas, I think, is an example where you're having revisionists do work, and throughout the whole curriculum of the country, not only in elementary and high school, but college students don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's my main concern.
yeah,
What?
what,
Where do we need to wrap up?
yeah, my last,
Lujan just told me security clearing the building.
oh, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All
Well,
right.
Forgive the abrupt end of our conversation, but thank
Okay.
you so much. It's been a real privilege. And honor.
Sure.
You want to come back tomorrow? It was really very, very fun.
You enjoyed it?
This video raises questions, and I need for you to be extremely honest in the comments when answering them. And just so you know, I only have one question. When it comes to the March on Washington, please go into the comments and expose everything that you know about it, everything that you possibly learned in school, maybe your experience, from family members participating in it, friends and family. I just want to learn what you know. First-hand experience or second-hand experience, could be very beneficial. Please be honest in the comments when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.